In today's episode, I'm going to share with you a story, something personal, something that happened back when I was in primary school. I hope you are ready.
You are listening to Fighting Together. Sit back, relax, and enjoy our daily episodes.
This is yet another episode of Fighting Together. I am very excited. I'm very excited that we had a successful crowdfunding campaign. You sent in donations. The money got all the way up to 12,000 rands. And the good news that I'm very excited about, I mentioned it before in the previous podcast episode, the equipment has been bought. It's going to be a while before it gets here. It's going to take some weeks before the shipping and all the stuff that need to happen. But it's on its way. Yeah, I'm very grateful and can never thank you enough. When the equipment gets here, depending with COVID, depending with the pandemic, we shall maneuver and start working towards expanding this podcast. Not just this podcast, but creating more content. Other podcast shows are going to pop up. Websites are going to pop up. One particular website is www.dailypodcast.show. Another website will be www.churchofchrist.co.zw. I'll give you more information about those websites when those websites are finally running and firing on all cylinders.
This is Fighting Together. We are fighting to make a positive impact in our God-hungry communities.
Today is a Saturday. I hope you're having a lovely weekend. If not, my hope is that this podcast will brighten your day. And I can't think of a better way to brighten your day than to jump right straight into the story I promised you.
Are you tired of consuming the same old content? Bored by the lack of variety? Stick around. Maybe this podcast will help.
If you have stuff to do, this podcast is perfect for you. Minimize this. Let it play in the background. And just do whatever you need to do. Open another browser tab and just browse somewhere else. Let this play. Back there in the background. The story that I'm about to tell you starts off when I was in primary school. It's a very short story. Like I've said before, I'm going through a process of refining how this podcast gets delivered to you. So today is one of those early experimental phases. And if it goes well, you will hear more personal stories from my life in future podcast episodes. Now, this particular story is going to be a bit short and it's going to connect with the next segment that I want to give you. So stick around. Where to begin? First and foremost, I want to describe my primary school. I'm doing this because I want those of you who are not in Zimbabwe or those of you who are not aware of the kind of education system that's run in my own community. I want us all to be on the same page. When you had a class back when I was in primary school, the classroom would have 45 students or so. And those students back in primary school, and just to clarify, primary school here where I am, I don't know where you are or what country you are in or continent, the primary school years would range from grade 1 to grade 7. And you would essentially be somewhere between 6 years old to 13 years old, 12 years old, thereabout, and that phase of your life was the primary school phase. And in that phase, most of the classes at the school I went were classes of 45 students. Now, these 45 students would sit on benches, not chairs, because I've seen on Hollywood films or whatever, Netflix shows. I've seen American setups where each student has their own chair that's attached to like a desk type thing, which is attached to the chair and it's all yours. And where I went to school, that wasn't the case. We had benches with no backrest. So you'd be sitting on the bench and then the bench was attached to a desk. So it's a long bench that's attached to a long desk. And you don't sit there alone, obviously, because it's a bench. You'd sit like, I think 5 or almost 6 of you. Maybe, I don't know, like on that one particular bench. Different primary schools have different designs, but on ours, I think 4 or 5 of you could fit on the one bench. And then when you're on that bench, the benches were brought together such that you would sit facing each other, kind of like people who are in a dining room or some kind of, I don't know, restaurant of sorts. So on the one side, you have students that are sitting on their own bench. On the other side, you'd have other students, and you're both facing each other. And when the teacher starts speaking, you turn your faces away from each other and then look at the teacher, who will be all the way on your side in front of you. And those groupings of those desks were called groups. And in our class, we had 6 groups. So that's group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, group 6. Now the story can begin. This classroom was one of many classrooms, and at some point in time, the school appoints prefects. Now, these prefects would be students that are chosen, the chosen students, the ones that, once chosen, start wearing special uniforms. And when they start wearing these special uniforms, they now have a position of authority. They are no longer just students. They're still students, but they're no longer just students. They can now tell other students what to do. You know, they are now the point of contact between staff members and the rest of the student body. Now, being a prefect was something that I thought, I think I can get used to that. So I thought, I'm definitely going to become a prefect. I'm tall, because you also needed to be physically present. You know, you had to be, and being tall was an advantage because you kind of had to tower over a significant amount of the student body, so that you're not this short person who they all look down upon or whatever, right? Yeah, so I thought I'm tall and I'm not too bad. I mean, I'm always on group 1, because those groups that I mentioned before, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, group 1, group 2, group 3, those groups, they weren't just sitting positions where you can randomly choose wherever you want to sit, but rather our school system graded us to say the students that are always on the top half of the class, or rather not even on the top half, but like on the top 10% or 8% or something of the class, those students will be the students that sit on group 1. Then the next grade of student sits on group 2, group 3. Every now and again, you could have an impromptu test, something random, and those tests would be used to reshuffle you on your positions. And if you were on group 6, you were essentially being graded as the lowest grade. I know, I can imagine what you must be thinking if this concept is new for you. Traumatic. Yeah, it's, I don't know. I won't comment on the system. I'm just giving it to you the way it was given to us. So, yeah, you're essentially at the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, when they place you on group 6 and so on and so on. And sometimes the margins weren't that broad. Like, if you drop by 5 points, you could go from being on group 1 to being on group 3. Or if you drop by, like, I don't know. And our tests where most of the times it will be out of 50. So you'd have 50 questions in English, 50 questions in maths, 50 questions in whatever else subject, you know. And out of those 50 questions, the totals would be added up and the groups would be assigned according to that. Yeah. So anyway, back to the whole prefects thing. Now, I thought, since I'm a bit taller than your average student, and I am always on group 1, yeah, I'm in the running to be a prefect. And then I was wrong. Our teacher, the teacher we had, our class teacher, he came in one day and essentially said, you know what? I don't like doing this. I'm kind of paraphrasing this because obviously my memory doesn't stretch back as far back as like primary school. But essentially, his attitude was, I don't like doing this. I don't like assigning some of my students to become prefects. The reason I don't like doing that is because they get distracted. They're here to learn. They're not here to become the cogs that run the system between the student body and the teachers. It's not their duty. They're just here to learn, get good grades, and move on to the next part of their learning, So he wasn't big on choosing some of his students to become prefects. And what he then did was, because he had to, he chose the minimum number of students. Like, I'm only doing this because I have to. Each classroom needs to send in their shortlist for people who should be prefects, And I wasn't chosen. Rather, a friend of mine was chosen. And when he was chosen, we're sitting on the same group. Essentially, he went, I don't know, because the teacher came and told him, it's yours if you want it. You shall become a prefect. All I now need to do is walk out that door and make it happen. Then my friend was like, I don't know. I don't know. He was a bit hesitant, because part of it, I don't know why he was hesitant. He would have to speak on his own behalf. But you have to know that this was a big shift. I mean, you now have to kind of be responsible. You now have to buy a different set of uniform. The uniform that you used to wear in school no longer applies. You now have to kind of throw that away, go back home, ask your parents to buy you an entire new kit of uniform because you're now a prefect, and blah, blah, blah. So it's not something that you just go, oh yeah, cool. I mean, some people went back home and would be told by their parents, no way, you're not becoming a prefect. You have one more year left of your 7 years of primary school. Why on earth would I buy an entirely new kit of uniforms for you to just wear for the one remaining year? No, not happening, So for different reasons, different people would say yes and end up coming back with my parents said no. Other parents felt like it takes you away from your books because now you have to be this person that's responsible for all these duties, blah, 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 Whew. So we're sitting there and the guy is a bit hesitant. And the teacher then said, if you don't want it, then the buck moves on to Tafadzwa. And I'm like, yeah, baby. Yeah, if it had been like that, for me, I would have gone, yes, I am in. And I don't know what kind of a prefect I would have been. I can't remember what I wanted to do with all that power. I have no idea. I mean, at this time, I was probably, 12 years old. I don't know what I wanted to do with that position. I don't know what I wanted to do with that power. But thinking back, I think maybe I might be wrong. I think our teacher was meant to choose 2 boys and 2 girls. But being the guy who he was, I think maybe my memory is wrong on that. He then decided to go 1 boy, 1 girl, minimum number. I won't give you more of my students to become prefects. And I'll touch back on why he possibly did that after this break.
We hope you have enjoyed that segment. Let's take a short break before we resume our podcast.
You are listening to Fighting Together. We are fighting to make a positive impact in our God-hungry communities.
Before we continue with the story, before we wrap it up, because it's essentially a short story, and like I said, I'm testing out different format styles for this podcast. But before we wrap it up like that, I want to quickly read from the Bible. It will all connect. Don't worry. It's going to connect with the primary school story I've been telling you. But I need to kind of put it in now before I go back to it later. I'll read from the first book of Samuel, chapter 8. And you have to understand that this is a time when kings were all around the people of Israel. Different nations had different kings, but the children of Israel had no king. They had never had a king, and they had no king, And now they are looking at all the other people who have kings, and they are thinking, how come we don't have a king? Not realizing that they had a direct line to God, and God was their king. Let me quickly read. I know it might be a bit confusing right now, but it's going to connect with the story that I'm telling you about the prefects in the primary school. Memories I'm revisiting. Yeah. Anyway, I'll read 1 Samuel chapter 8, starting off from verse 5. It says they. The first word that's there is they. And they is essentially the elders of Israel. So let me start off from there. They said to him, and him is Samuel. Samuel was the prophet, and him being a prophet, he was the direct line. He was the person who sort of helped the nation in making sure the nation stayed on the righteous path, the path which God wanted Israel to walk on, right? So they is the elders of Israel. Him is Samuel. They said to him, you are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now, appoint a king to lead us, such as all other nations have. And now they're saying to Samuel, dude, you are old, and I guess they're implying that you're about to die. And when we look at your sons, they don't walk on your path. Those kids are rascals, I presume. I don't know. Those sons of yours, they're not walking down your path. So what we now need is we need a change of strategy. You, as a prophet, now need to appoint a king, the first king of Israel. Presumably, when you die, that guy will be the guy we can now look towards, And Samuel, what does he think of all this? You are old and your sons do not follow your ways. Now, appoint a king to lead us, such as all other nations have. They're envying other nations, not realizing what they have. Going back to my story, I'm talking about this whole responsibility where once you were assigned to be a prefect, you had certain meetings that you probably had to attend. I didn't get chosen, so I wouldn't know. And you had all these responsibilities that would be piled upon you, such that, going back to my story, my friend went back home, probably talked it through with his parents. I wasn't there, so I wouldn't know. I can't say anything on that. But the next day, he went from, I'm not sure if I want to become a prefect, to walking back to class, getting back to our teacher and saying, yes, I'm going to become a prefect. So he had talked it over with his parents, and they decided he should do it, So he went from, he was on the fence. I was almost there. I had 1 foot in. All he had to do was say, nah, I talked it with my parents, and it's not going to happen. And I'm in, But our teacher, like I said, our class teacher was against this whole concept where he had to choose and appoint some of his students to become prefects. Later on, as I grew older, later on, as I begin to understand some of the things and attitudes he had, some of the things he said, I then realized that he wanted us to focus on our education. If it was in his power, our class teacher would have just said, no, none of my students shall be prefects. I want them focused on just their lessons, their subjects, their exercises, I have different things that I'm teaching them, and that's all they need. That's all they should focus on. Yeah. And he was trying to kind of save us from all of that. And just to add a cherry on top of all that, or rather, if I may put it differently, to rub salt into the wound. Sometime later, I can't remember how long, I think it was months down the line, that friend of mine came back to me. Not necessarily to say that he had left. We're still like mingling and going to classes together and playing together, etc., etc., you know. But at some point in time, he then came to me in a different manner and said, dude, I don't like this whole prefect business. If I could turn back time, you know what, I would have just said no and not told my parents about it and just let you be the prefect, you know. That was like a knife through my heart. I mean, I had completely forgotten it. I had completely come to terms with the fact that I was not chosen, and my life was now in a different place. I'm moving on. And then to have someone come back to you, it's a bit like losing a presidential election. And then 2 years down the line, the guy who beat you in that presidential election goes on TV and says, you know what? I shouldn't have done this. I should have just, well, I guess that's not how presidential elections work. You don't just surrender to the other guy. I don't know. Unless when you're still in your own party, when you do like those internal elections within your own party. Yeah. So I guess you can step down there and let someone else from your own party run instead of you. Anyway, let me not put politics into this.
This podcast was made possible through your donations, prayers, love, and continued support.
I hope you enjoyed that story. I hope you enjoyed going down memory lane with me. I'm going to do these kind of stories frequently where I want to use illustrations that can help the word of God sink, you know. Yeah, not that the word of God needs any help. It's already polished and crisp in how it was written, but sometimes we are deaf or blind to what's being said, and sometimes we mistakenly think it's removed from our day-to-day life. I mean, the story I told you about was a story of a teacher who didn't want his students, any of his students, burdened with the responsibility of becoming prefects, you know. Yeah, and it's also a story about a friend of mine who, when he was offered the role, was on the fence, you know. He was like, shall I do it? Maybe not. I don't know. Then having gone home, talked it through with his parents, he came back and he was like, I'm doing it. It's also a story, additionally, of me forgetting about that whole thing. My life went on. Life is good. All that is now behind me. Then the guy comes back later to say, man, if I could turn back time, I would just have let you have this, you know. I would have just let you be the prefect when it was initially offered. You know. And now I was feeling like, oh man, you mean I could have been wearing the special uniform and I could have been like walking around telling all the students what to do because I'm now a prefect? Come on. But while talking about that story, I touched a little bit on Israel. Let me now go back into the Bible and kind of bring this whole thing together, you know, kind of tie it all together so that there are no loose strings or loose ends that are left. What did the people do? How did Samuel react? What was God's reaction? I mean, we've had a situation here where people have now gone to a prophet and essentially told him, dude, you look like you might die any day soon. So guess what? We now want a king. We're done with this whole prophet business because your sons do not walk the same manner, the same road, the same principles that you have lived by. They are not like you. So we now want a king. Let's go into the Bible, dig into it again and see what and see what's waiting for us there, you know. But when they said, let me just tell you that this is 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 6. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. Now, Samuel was displeased. He was like, oh, I never thought you'd get to a point where you'd not realize what we're all about. Our king is God. We have this direct line to God, We are not like other people. You can't come here and say, give us a king like other nations. We're special. We're not like them, And God said to Samuel, you know what? Don't worry. They haven't rejected you. Let me read it again. Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. God is saying, I'm their king. How come they're saying they don't have a king? Is it because they don't see me walking around with a crown on my head? Is it because they don't have a red carpet rolled out for me? How come they're saying all of a sudden they don't have a king? And Samuel was probably going, yeah, I'm also shocked as you are. I thought everyone understood that our king is God, and now I feel rejected. Then God is like, no, it is not you that they have rejected, but rather they have rejected me. I mean, you get through a lot of things. And power does stuff to people. Sometimes you can have a crown put on you that makes you feel, oh man, I wish I hadn't taken this thing. I wish I had not gone through this process or fought to become a prefect. I wish I had just left it to be something for you, Sometimes you are in a good situation. Me and my friend, when we were not prefects, both of us were in a good situation. Our teacher delayed the prefect picking thing, He delayed that because he was trying to avoid doing that. And we didn't realize that we were actually in a good situation because of it, because we had no additional responsibilities on top of us needing to pass, All we had to do was go to school, read our books, go back home, do our homework. Life is good. And we didn't realize that, life was good. My friend later realized that, life is no longer so good. When he eventually accepted to become a prefect, I don't know what made him realize that he wasn't cut out for it or he wasn't enjoying it. I don't know why he changed his mind. I don't know why. He came back to me and said, I should have just let you be the prefect. I don't know. And now I'm there, heartbroken, thinking, oh man, you mean I could have been a prefect? And I'm heartbroken. He's tired. We're in a place that's completely different from the place we were when none of this was there, And the children of Israel, they had a king, God, but they didn't know it. And they went with, they didn't go with pitchforks and torches, but essentially they went with verbal pitchforks and verbal torches to Samuel and demanded a king, Let's go down and hear what Samuel had to say. The next part I'm going to read in both English and Shona. I need to kind of go back to Shona every now and again because it's my native language and it makes it easier for me to kind of hit home with some of the things, with some of the statements. Your language is always going to be your language. It hits differently. But don't worry, I'll touch a little bit on English, then redo the verses in Shona. After that, the podcast will be over and we'll have a song. So, what's coming up next? Me reading in English, me switching to Shona, him from a group of talented voices. But before that, let's take another quick break.
These days, the internet is filled with toxic content, politics, and depressing news. If you want a bit of refuge from all that chaos, then visit www.dailypodcast.show, where we give you hope, hymns, and something different.
Are you tired of consuming the same old content? Bored by the lack of variety? Stick around. Maybe this podcast will help.
How is your Saturday going? I hope this podcast is kind of helping you go through the morning. Yeah, anyway, if you've enjoyed this podcast, it's not yet done. We're about to wrap it up. Feel free to share it, get it out there. Because I think by now you've kind of realized what makes this podcast different. I think you have people in your life that you might think, I wish this person would kind of hear this podcast because this is like nothing else on my timeline. Feel free to share. Now, I want to kind of wrap everything up before I give you a song that's going to be sung by voices from the Church of Christ, a congregation down in South Africa, all the way in Durban. Yeah, the group of people are from that congregation down in South Africa, and they are called Inside Out. But before we get to that, because that's going to be the last thing that we play, I wanted to then give you what Samuel had to say. Here's what Samuel said to the people, because obviously where we left off things, Samuel was not happy, and even God was not happy, because God thought, I'm your king. How are you not realizing that I am your king? Samuel then said this in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 11. This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your come on. Listening to that Bible reading, it's like, now I've got this song stuck in my head. Take, but you never give. It's a lot of taking. And Samuel saying, how are you not realizing that how things are now is better than you assigning this king? How are you not seeing that you already have an amazing king? One who is not doing all these things. Poor Israel. Now, just because I want everyone to have an intimate passion for the scripture, I'm going to reread what I just read, which is from the first book of Samuel, chapter 8, verse 11. I'm going to read it in Shona. I know not everyone speaks Shona, but luckily for you, after this reading, I have an English song that's coming up. So, yeah.
Get your Bible ready. The next segment has now begun.
Summary, chapter 8, ndimadikia 11. Samueri akataura mashoko ose aJehovha kuvanhu vakanga vachimukumbira mambo. Akati, izvi ndizvo zvichaitwa neachakutongai. Achatora vanakomana venyu agoita kuti vashande nengoro dzake dzehondo namabhiza, uye vachamhanya vari mberi kwengoro dzake. Vamwe vavo achavaita vatungamiri vezviuru navatungamiri va50, uye achaita kuti vamwe varime minda yake pamwe chete nekuikohwa, uye achaita kuti vamwe vagadzire zvombo zvehondo nemidziyo yengoro dzake. Achatora vanasikana venyu kuti vave vagadziri vamafuta anonhuhwira navabiki vozvokudya navabiki vechingwa. Achatora minda yenyu yakaisvonaka neminda yemizambiringa neminda yemiorivi agozvipa kuvatariri vake. I mean, it's take. Yeah, and it's something that, I don't know, you never think of when you're in a position of needing something. You don't think, is this thing that I need going to add as much value to me, to my life, as I think it will, I mean, 12-year-old Tafadzwa didn't think or didn't even understand why on earth his class teacher was against having his students given extra responsibilities on top of the one primary goal of learning. I couldn't understand that. I was like, let us be prefects. As much as Israel was like, we want a king, Going there to Samuel with, they didn't literally go there with pitchforks and torches, but they went there with verbal pitchforks and verbal torches, demanding a king, not realizing what it was all going to mean. Now, this story is not complete. It shall not be complete until we touch on how the king fell.
If you are enjoying this podcast, then I think you are going to love our website. Visit www.dailypodcast.show.
In order for us to touch on how the king fell, what did the king do wrong? I can imagine he went and did everything that was said here, which is taking your sons to do blah, 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 then taking your daughters to do blah, 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 taking this XYZ, taking the prime fields, the best of the farming land, etc., etc. In addition to all that, there was one more thing that Samuel did. But before we can go to what Samuel did, let's go back to Exodus. Exodus is a book where the children of Israel were in motion, moving, And in Exodus, there was a time when they got into battles. One particular battle is in Exodus chapter 17. Yeah. Exodus chapter 17, you find the people fighting there, And after the battle, on verse 14, let me read. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Now, this is the Lord saying to Moses, and it's after a battle. If you want to know more about the battle, it's a battle I think you should read about. The battle was so intense, and I'm trying to motivate you to pick up your Bible, go into your Bible, and read the battle. It was such an intense battle that after the children of Israel were done with the fighting, the Lord said, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the Amalek from under heaven. Amalek was the rival tribe that they had just ended the battle with. And God is saying, I am going to completely blot them out from under the heaven, right? Now, why did we go back to Exodus? It's because we're talking about this king that the people had cried out for. Now, that king, that exact king was then given a task.
If you are enjoying this podcast, then I think you are going to love our website. Visit www.dailypodcast.show.
Like I said, Israel cried out for a king. Israel chose the king they wanted. And now we are in Samuel, back in Samuel. Chapter 15 this time, verse 3. God is saying the words, now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. It's brutal. It's like go there and destroy everything. Let me go back to the beginning of that, right? Samuel said to Saul, Saul is now the king that Israel asked for, the king that Israel chose. Samuel said to Saul, because now Samuel the prophet is saying, okay, you want a king? Here's the you've chosen a king. Now we're going to work with the king in fulfilling God's wishes, in fulfilling whatever God wants done on earth. And here's the thing. I am the Lord. Let me go back. Samuel said to Saul, rather, I am the Lord sent to anoint you king over the people of Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. And as we know, Saul went there, Saul destroyed a lot of things, but he looked at some of the livestock and thought to himself, come on, look at that. I'm not going to destroy. Why? I'm not going to destroy that. And sometimes we go through those temptations to go, man, come on. And now the king that they have asked for has been tempted by this livestock. He decided to save it. And that was the beginning of his downfall, because he didn't listen to the exact command, to the exact instruction that he had been given. Whew! That was quite a lot. Yeah, and I can't begin to tell you how grateful I am for the crowdfunding campaign. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. As promised, I shall now leave you listening to Inside Out. It's a group. The voices you're hearing are voices from members of the Church of Christ. May God be with you. Have a lovely weekend.
The splendor of a king, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide. It trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. And age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead three in one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God! Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. How great is our God. and all will see how great